The phone bill sat on the kitchen counter, staring at me like an accusation. I hadn't been expecting it. But once I saw it, I couldn't look away. The numbers blurred in front of my eyes as my heart started racing, the blood in my veins thickening with dread. It had always been this way, hadn't it? I'd always felt like something wasn't right, like something was just a little bit off, but I never had the courage to face it. Maybe I had been too afraid to know. Or maybe I'd been too trusting, too naive. But now, here it was, proof. Solid, undeniable proof. I had to make sense of it. I had to know what it meant. Her name, his name, both on the list. Over and over again. I didn't know how long I had been standing there, staring at that bill, but I couldn't seem to stop. I couldn't stop the nausea rising in my throat, the pit that had formed deep in my stomach. My fingers felt like they were made of lead as I held the paper, the ink smearing in front of my eyes. It was a silent betrayal, the kind that felt worse than anything else, the kind that cut deeper than words. I had never thought she would do something like this. Not to me. Not after everything we had been through. She always deleted her call history, a habit she defended as a way of keeping things private. But I had never questioned it. Trusting her had always been easy, maybe too easy. Maybe that's what had made me blind to everything else. I had let it slide, let the little things build up until they became big things. Until they became this. I walked over to the couch and sat down, the paper still in my hand, and I tried to breathe. I tried to steady myself, but it was like trying to hold water in my hands. The more I tried, the more it slipped away. The phone bill didn't lie. Her name had shown up more than once. But what did that mean? Had it been innocent? Just a random slip, maybe a few calls to someone from work? I wanted to believe that. I wanted to hope for that. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. I stood up, my mind racing, and walked to her room. The door was ajar. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should just leave it alone. If maybe the truth was something I couldn't handle. But the doubt gnawed at me. It was pulling me, compelling me to look deeper. I needed to know. I pushed the door open. The room was still, too still. The bed was unmade, the sheets twisted in a way that was all too familiar. I walked over to her dresser, my fingers trembling as I opened the drawer. It was a mess, filled with half-folded clothes and scattered papers. I dug through it until I found her phone. It was just sitting there, face down. It wasn't like I had never seen it before. We had always shared things. We had always been open with each other, at least, that's what I had believed. But now, as I stared at it, it felt like the weight of 1,000 questions was pressing down on me. I had no right to feel like this, I knew that. But I couldn't stop it. I couldn't stop myself from feeling like something had been taken from me, something precious. I reached for the phone. It was locked, of course. But that wasn't a surprise. She'd always been protective of her privacy, even though it never bothered me before. Now, it felt like a barricade, a wall I couldn't climb over. I stared at the phone for a long time, my pulse thundering in my ears. I had a choice to make. I could walk away. I could pretend I didn't see anything, pretend the phone bill meant nothing, that the calls were innocent. But I knew myself too well. And I knew I couldn't live in that kind of uncertainty. I couldn't live wondering if everything I thought I knew was a lie. I picked up the phone, turned it over, and entered the password she had never bothered to change. It opened with ease, as if she never suspected anyone would care to look. I tried not to breathe too loudly as I opened the messaging app. I scanned the list of conversations, my eyes skimming over names, dates, and messages that meant nothing to me. Then I found it. The thread. His name. I froze, staring at it for a long time. A wave of cold washed over me. I could feel my breath catching in my chest as my mind raced. The name was familiar, too familiar. But why? Why was his name here? Why had she been talking to him like this? I clicked on the conversation, my fingers trembling, barely able to hold the phone steady. The screen lit up, revealing message after message, each one more intimate than the last. Words of affection, whispered secrets, promises of things I didn't want to imagine. I scrolled, each new message piercing deeper. My throat tightened, and I couldn't breathe. What had happened? How had I missed this? How had I been so blind to what was happening right under my nose? I couldn't answer. All I knew was that my stomach was in knots, my hands shaking uncontrollably. The truth was clear, but it wasn't enough. I needed more. I needed to understand everything. I needed to know when it had all started, how long it had been going on, and why she had kept it hidden from me. I needed answers. But no matter how many questions I had, no matter how badly I wanted to confront her, I knew one thing for sure: everything had changed. The trust we had built, the love we had shared, had all been shattered in the space of a few clicks. There was no going back from this. There was no fixing what was broken. I set the phone down on the bed, my hands numb, and I sat back. The world outside the window felt distant, like it was happening to someone else. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I was alone, trapped inside a reality I hadn't asked for. A reality where everything I thought I knew had crumbled away. I glanced at the phone again, the flashing screen taunting me with its secrets. But I didn't touch it. Not yet. There was still so much to understand, so much to unravel. And I wasn't sure if I could face it. But the truth, like the phone bill, wasn't going away. It was there, staring at me, daring me to look deeper. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, her voice, the sound of her laughter, replayed in my mind, and the images of those messages burned behind my eyelids. I tried to push it out, but the harder I fought it, the clearer it became. That night, I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, as the questions gnawed at me relentlessly. How long? How had I missed it? The next morning, I couldn't even look at her. She had no idea I knew, no idea I had gone through her phone. She went about her routine as if everything was normal. She kissed me on the cheek, made us both coffee, and talked about her plans for the day. But the words felt distant, hollow. I couldn't hear them. All I could hear was the sound of her voice in those messages, her whispers to him. I barely ate breakfast. I wasn't hungry. My stomach churned, a constant knot that wouldn't let go. I didn't know what to do. I knew I couldn't confront her, not yet. I needed to know more. I needed the truth, the whole truth. Not just the fragments that had come to me in the middle of the night. I had to know how deep this thing went. And I had to find out if she felt the same way about him. Or if it was something else entirely. I couldn't risk assuming anything. I had to understand. I left the house early, saying I had errands to run. I didn't feel like being around her anymore. Not right now. Not with the weight of what I had just discovered pressing down on me. I went to the coffee shop we both liked, but I couldn't focus on the steam rising from my cup. I couldn't focus on anything except the nagging question: how long had this been happening? The phone bill, the deleted messages, the calls. They all pointed to one thing, one painful truth. She had been lying to me. I hadn't even considered the possibility of infidelity until now. Sure, we'd had our ups and downs, but hadn't we always worked through them? Our relationship had always felt solid, or at least I thought it had. But now, sitting in that coffee shop, the doubt that had once lived quietly in the back of my mind roared to the front. I was seeing her in a new light, a light that felt cold and unfamiliar. I knew I couldn't go on like this. I couldn't pretend everything was fine when I knew it wasn't. But I had no idea how to approach it, how to make her admit what was going on. I didn't even know if she would. What if she denied everything? What if she gaslighted me, twisted the truth into something that made me feel like the crazy one? I was already vulnerable, already questioning myself. She could easily turn it all back on me, and I wasn't sure I could handle that. I spent the day distracted, my mind constantly spinning. The feeling of betrayal had settled deep in my bones. I couldn't escape it. I couldn't ignore the fact that the person I had trusted most in the world had kept secrets from me. I couldn't understand how something so simple as a phone bill had shattered everything. She had made it clear over the years that privacy was important to her, that there were parts of her life she kept to herself. But this wasn't just about privacy. This was about dishonesty. This was about betrayal. When I finally returned home, it felt like a foreign place. The smell of her perfume, the warmth of the lights, the soft hum of the refrigerator, it all felt like something I didn't belong to anymore. How had it all turned so quickly? How had everything shifted in the span of a few hours? I walked in and found her sitting on the couch, flipping through a magazine. She looked up at me and smiled, that familiar smile that always made my heart soften. But now, it felt different. It felt like a mask. A carefully constructed illusion. "Hey," she said, her voice warm and unknowing. "How was your day?" I stood there for a second, unsure of what to say. How could I ask her about the phone bill? How could I confront her with the knowledge I had? I wasn't ready to hear the lies, or worse, to hear nothing at all. "Good," I said, forcing a smile. It felt stiff, unnatural. "Busy, but good." She smiled back, but it didn't reach her eyes. She didn't seem to notice. Or maybe she was pretending not to. She always had a way of deflecting. Of avoiding the deeper conversations. It was a skill she had perfected over the years, and I had let her. I had let her control the narrative, let her decide when we talked about the hard things. But now, I couldn't let it slide. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. The silence between us was thick, oppressive. I knew something was wrong, but she wasn't ready to acknowledge it. She couldn't be. Not yet. I sat down on the opposite end of the couch. The air felt heavy with tension. We didn't speak for a few moments, and I could feel the seconds stretching into eternity. Finally, she glanced up at me, her brow furrowed slightly. "What's going on?" she asked, concern in her voice. "You've been off today." I didn't answer right away. I wanted to ask her about the phone bill, about the calls, about everything. But something held me back. Was I ready to hear her explanation? Was I prepared for what she might say? "I don't know," I said finally. My voice felt thin, almost detached. "I guess I've just been thinking a lot." She didn't press further, which only made the silence feel worse. She picked up her magazine again and flipped through it aimlessly. But I couldn't focus on anything else except the overwhelming feeling of doubt that had settled deep inside me. That night, I stayed up long after she fell asleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, as the thoughts continued to swirl in my head. I wanted to believe that maybe I was wrong. Maybe I had misinterpreted the phone bill, misunderstood everything. But deep down, I knew better. The signs were there. They had always been there. I didn't know where this would go or what I was going to do next. But I knew one thing for sure, things would never be the same again. The truth was out there, hidden in her phone, in the messages, in the lies. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I had to find out everything. And no matter how much it hurt, I couldn't turn back now. The following days felt like a slow unraveling of everything I thought I knew about her and our life together. Every time I looked at her, a feeling of unease washed over me, a gnawing sense of betrayal that I couldn't escape. I couldn't ignore the weight of the truth that had lodged itself in my chest. And yet, I still found myself questioning the next step. Was I ready to face it? To confront her with what I knew? I couldn't keep living in this limbo. I spent another night tossing and turning, barely sleeping. The idea of confronting her had been rolling around in my mind for days, but I couldn't find the right moment. Each time I thought about it, I felt sick to my stomach. Part of me wanted to pretend I hadn't seen the phone bill, to erase the images of the calls, to let things go back to the way they were. But the other part of me, the part that had been betrayed, demanded the truth. I couldn't live with the lies anymore. She was out that afternoon, meeting with a friend she had talked about constantly for the last few weeks. I found myself at home, pacing back and forth in the living room, the silence pressing down on me like a heavy weight. I had made up my mind. I was going to ask her. I was going to confront her with the phone bill, with the questions I had been too afraid to ask before. No more pretending. No more running. As I sat on the couch, the phone bill in my hand, I realized how ridiculous this was. She had always told me we should be open, that honesty was the foundation of our relationship. But it didn't feel like honesty anymore. It felt like she was hiding something, something important, something that could shatter everything we'd built. I could feel my pulse quicken, my chest tightening, the weight of the moment settling in. The door creaked open, and she walked in, her smile bright and carefree, the kind of smile that made me fall in love with her every day. But now, it made me sick. The fake smile she wore, the mask she had crafted, it felt so transparent. I could see it for what it was now. Her eyes flickered toward me, registering the tension in the room immediately. "Hey, you okay?" she asked, her voice soft, too soft. "You look different." I didn't say anything at first. I just stared at her. My mind screamed for me to speak, to say the words that would break everything, but they stuck in my throat. I couldn't find the strength to ask her the question that had been eating at me for days. I had rehearsed it 1,000 times in my head, but now, in front of her, I felt like I couldn't move. The betrayal felt so fresh, so raw. I wasn't sure if I could take hearing her lies. She stepped closer, her voice tinged with concern. "What's wrong?" she asked, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Talk to me." I swallowed hard, my heart racing. This was it. I couldn't back down now. "I know about the calls," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but it felt like a shout in the quiet room. Her face froze, the smile dropping from her lips as she stared at me, her eyes widening slightly. For a moment, neither of us moved. The air between us was thick with tension, with uncertainty, with the weight of the truth hanging over us. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. I felt a knot form in my stomach, a mix of anger and disbelief. I had to push forward, to force her to acknowledge what I already knew. The phone bill, I continued, the calls, the messages. I know you've been talking to him. I know what's going on. Her eyes flickered, and I saw something there. It wasn't guilt, not immediately, but it was something close to it. It was a kind of resignation. She looked at me like she was already trying to figure out how to explain herself, how to make this all seem less real than it was. She took a deep breath, her gaze dropping to the floor. I didn't want you to find out like this, she said quietly, almost to herself. I didn't think it would ever come to this. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I stood up, the anger rising in me like a storm. You didn't think it would come to this? You've been hiding this from me, lying to my face, and now you're acting like it's nothing. She winced, but she didn't say anything. The silence stretched on, and I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears, my heart racing faster than it had ever before. I wanted answers, but I didn't know if I could take them. What did he give you that I couldn't? I asked, my voice thick with emotion. What did I not do right? She flinched at the question, her shoulders sagging slightly as she looked up at me. Her voice trembled when she spoke. It wasn't like that, she said softly. It wasn't about something you weren't giving me. I narrowed my eyes, trying to make sense of her words, but I was too clouded by the hurt, the betrayal, to hear her clearly. Then why? Why did you do it? For a long moment, she didn't respond. Her hands trembled slightly, and I could see the guilt in her eyes. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. She couldn't find the words, or maybe she didn't want to. Either way, the silence between us was suffocating. I don't know, she said finally, her voice barely audible. I don't know why it happened. I wanted to scream. I wanted to yell at her, to demand a better answer, something that would make sense of the mess she had created. But I didn't. I stood there, watching her, trying to make sense of the woman I thought I knew. You don't know? I asked, my voice low, my anger simmering beneath the surface. You don't know why you betrayed me? Why you let me live a lie for all this time? Her eyes filled with tears now, and she looked away, unable to meet my gaze. I couldn't decide if I wanted to comfort her or leave. The thought of comforting her, after everything, felt like a betrayal to myself. But at the same time, I couldn't stand the thought of losing her. The love I had for her was still there, buried beneath all the hurt. It made my chest ache, but it wasn't enough to erase the fact that she had broken me. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice cracking. I never meant for any of this to happen. I never meant to hurt you. But the words felt empty. I wanted to believe her, but how could I? How could I trust her again? I didn't have an answer. I didn't know what would happen next. But I knew one thing for sure, everything had changed. And I had no idea how to fix it. I could feel the tension in my bones, a sharp ache that wouldn't go away, no matter how much I tried to deny it. As the days dragged on after that conversation, I couldn't escape the feeling that something fundamental had broken between us. We were still living together, still sharing the same space, but it was as if we were both just pretending. Pretending that things could go back to normal. Pretending that the trust we'd built could be repaired with a few broken words, a few tearful apologies. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. She apologized over and over, but it was just noise to me now. I heard the words, but I didn't feel them. Every time she looked at me with those sad, apologetic eyes, I felt like I was suffocating. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her. But how could I? How could I erase the image of those phone calls, the sneaky messages, the betrayal that I had caught her in? Trust was something that couldn't be pieced back together once it had shattered, no matter how hard you tried. We still shared a bed. The silence between us was more unbearable than anything else. I could feel her shift in the dark, trying to get comfortable, but I couldn't find the warmth in her anymore. It was like I was sleeping next to a stranger, someone I used to know, someone I used to love. It was too much, and yet it wasn't enough. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the faces, the ones she'd made me feel like I was the only one for. The ones that now felt like a lie. One evening, a week after the confrontation, I came home late from work. I knew she'd been home all day, yet there was an unfamiliar chill in the air when I walked through the door. I expected to find her in the kitchen, making dinner like usual, but instead, the house was eerily quiet. I could hear the faint sound of the TV in the background, the soft hum of the refrigerator, but there was something unsettling about it. The silence didn't feel comfortable. It felt like something was off. I found her sitting on the couch, her back to me, staring blankly at the TV. Her hands were folded in her lap, and she didn't even look up when I entered. A cold pit formed in my stomach. Something in the air had shifted, and I couldn't put my finger on it. "Hey," I said, my voice low, testing the waters. I wasn't sure if I was ready to dive into this again. "You okay?" She didn't respond right away. For a moment, I thought she hadn't heard me. But then, slowly, she turned her head, meeting my gaze with an expression that I couldn't quite read. It wasn't guilt, it wasn't sadness, it was something else. Something darker. Something detached. "I think we need to talk," she said, her voice flat, emotionless. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't know whether to brace myself for more lies or for the truth I wasn't ready to hear. Whatever it was, I wasn't sure I could handle it. But the silence between us was unbearable, and I couldn't keep pretending like everything was fine. "About what?" I asked, my throat dry. I tried to keep my voice even, but it cracked under the pressure. "We've talked already." She sighed, running a hand through her hair, looking more tired than I had ever seen her. "No. Not about what you think," she said softly. "About everything. About us." I sat down next to her, my body tense. I wasn't sure if I was ready for the truth, but I knew it was coming. The storm was inevitable. I braced myself for impact, my hands gripping the edge of the couch, my knuckles turning white. "What are you saying?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She exhaled, her shoulders slumping as if a weight was finally being lifted. Her eyes were distant, like she was looking at something far beyond me. "I don't know how to fix this. I don't know if I can." My breath caught in my throat. "You don't know? You've been lying to me for months, and now you don't know if you can fix this." Her lips quivered, and she turned her face away from me, wiping her eyes as though she was trying to stop herself from breaking. "I don't know how to fix it because I don't think I can. I've been doing this for so long, and now I can't even look at myself. I don't even recognize who I've become." I felt my anger surge, but I pushed it down. I had to understand what she was saying before I could react. "What do you mean, who you've become?" "You've been lying to me, to us, for months. I don't understand why you didn't just come to me if something was wrong. If you were unhappy, if you needed something more from me. Why did you have to go behind my back?" She shook her head, looking at me with a sad, defeated expression. "I didn't think you would understand. I didn't think you'd believe me. I thought if I told you, I'd lose everything we've built. I thought I could control it, but I couldn't." I swallowed hard, trying to keep the rage from bubbling over. "You thought you could control it? You thought lying to me, keeping secrets from me, was somehow easier than telling the truth? That doesn't even make sense. You've been living a lie." She closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't want to hurt us. I just didn't know how to stop once it started." I couldn't breathe. The words were cutting deeper than anything I'd ever felt before. "So what now? What do we do now?" She didn't answer right away. The silence stretched between us like a chasm, and I felt the weight of the question hanging in the air. There was no turning back. There was no easy answer. I could feel myself pulling away, emotionally, physically. I couldn't look at her without seeing the lies anymore. "I don't know," she whispered. "I think we need time. I think we need to figure out who we are without each other. I don't know if I can be what you need me to be anymore." The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. She was pulling away, and for the first time in months, I realized that this was it. This wasn't something we could fix with a conversation or a few apologies. It was over. She had already checked out, and I was just too blind to see it until now. My throat tightened, and I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. "I guess this is it then," I said, my voice cracking. "I don't know if I can stay after all of this. I don't think I can keep living in a relationship built on lies." She nodded slowly, wiping her eyes. "I understand." The finality of it hit me all at once. The house, the life we had shared, felt so small now. The memories of us, of her, of us together, felt distant, like a dream I couldn't remember clearly anymore. The love, the trust, the bond we had built over the years was gone, and I wasn't sure how to get it back. The person I had known her to be was slipping away, and all that was left was a shell of the woman I had fallen in love with. I stood up, my legs shaking. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know what to do next. But one thing was clear, I couldn't keep living in this lie. It was time to walk away. I turned to leave, but before I could step out the door, I heard her voice one last time. "Don't go." But I didn't turn back. I had no idea what the next step was. I didn't know how to navigate this new version of my life, this version where everything I thought I knew had been upended. The days that followed felt like a blur, a hazy stretch of time where everything was foggy, uncertain. I couldn't seem to shake the feeling that something fundamental inside me had snapped. The hurt was more than just a betrayal, it was the fact that I had allowed myself to live in a world built on a lie for so long. I spent the next few weeks trying to regain some semblance of normalcy, but I couldn't. I couldn't pretend that nothing had changed. The silence in the house was deafening, and the space between us was like an ocean, vast and unforgiving. Every corner, every object in the apartment, reminded me of the woman I had loved, the woman I had built a life with. And yet, she was gone. That version of her was gone. The woman who had promised me everything, the woman who had held me and told me everything would be okay, was a stranger now. I couldn't understand how it had all fallen apart so quickly. How did we go from being so in love to being two people living in the same space, both too afraid to confront the truth? I felt like a ghost, like I was watching my own life unfold from a distance. I started keeping busy. It was the only thing I could do to distract myself from the crushing weight of it all. I worked late, picking up extra shifts when I could. I called my friends, making excuses for not hanging out. Anything to avoid the raw, empty feeling that had settled deep within me. But one evening, when I came home after a particularly grueling day at work, I found a note on the kitchen counter. My heart skipped when I saw her handwriting. "We need to talk." I didn't want to. I didn't want to listen to anything more. I had heard all the explanations, all the apologies. But something in me, some part of me that was still tethered to what we once had, told me I had to at least hear her out. So, I called out her name as I stepped inside, knowing full well she was still there. I could hear the soft shuffling of her feet from the other room. "I'm here," she said, her voice softer than it had been in days. I walked into the living room, and she was sitting on the couch, eyes red, but not from crying. More like from exhaustion. She looked so different, like a shadow of the person I had once known. "I didn't know how to start this conversation," she began, looking down at her hands. "But I can't keep avoiding it. I don't think we can just go back to the way things were. I don't even know if we should try." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. Part of me wanted to scream, to yell, to let her know how much pain she had caused. But the other part of me, the part that still cared for her, the part that still loved her, was silent. I didn't know what to say, what to feel anymore. "I've been thinking about everything," she continued, her voice breaking just a little. "And I know I've done something unforgivable. I've lied to you, and I've hurt you. But I need you to understand that. I didn't want it to happen. It wasn't planned. It wasn't supposed to be this way." I felt the anger rise again, but I didn't allow it to take over. Instead, I asked, "Then why? Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you come to me when things started to fall apart? Why did you let it get this far?" She swallowed hard, as if she were trying to keep the tears at bay. "I was scared," she said, barely above a whisper. "I didn't want to lose you. I didn't want to hurt you. But I couldn't ignore it anymore. I couldn't keep lying to you and pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. I'm sorry." I sat down beside her, the space between us still feeling as wide as an ocean. "You think saying sorry is enough? Do you think that fixes everything?" I tried to keep my voice steady, but it trembled despite myself. "I don't know if it fixes anything," she said, shaking her head. "I just know that I've ruined everything. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to apologize, because I know I owe you that." Her words were sincere, but they didn't change anything. The damage was done. The trust had been broken beyond repair. I had always been the type of person to give second chances, but this felt different. This felt like something I couldn't come back from. "I don't know what to do with all of this," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I don't know how to move forward from here." There was a long silence between us, and in that silence, everything became clear. I couldn't fix what had been broken. No matter how much I wanted to, no matter how much I loved her, I couldn't ignore the fact that we were no longer the people we had once been. We were two strangers who had once shared a life, and now that life was gone. "I think we need to let go," I said, my heart breaking as I said the words I never thought I would have to say. "I think we need to go our separate ways." She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes once more. "I agree," she whispered. "I think that's what's best for both of us." And just like that, it was over. The next few weeks were a blur. She moved out, and the silence in the house became deafening. It was hard to even look at the places where we used to be, the spots where we had shared so many memories. The couch, the kitchen table, the bed, everything felt tainted, as if her absence had left a permanent mark on the space we once filled with laughter and love. I tried to move on. I tried to distract myself, to push the pain away. But it wasn't that simple. There were nights when I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering where it all went wrong. Wondering if I had missed the signs, if there was something I could have done differently to prevent this. But the truth was, I couldn't change the past. I could only move forward. And slowly, over time, I did. It wasn't easy, and I didn't do it without scars. But I learned that sometimes, even the most painful experiences can lead to growth. I learned that sometimes, you have to let go of the people you love the most in order to heal. I learned that forgiveness isn't always about reconciliation, it's about freeing yourself from the past and moving forward into the future. And so, I walked away from the life I thought I'd had, and took the first steps toward rebuilding my own. One day at a time.